Hello and welcome to another episode of Reap the Spoils. I'm Mark Sullivan.
I'm Delilah Lugo.
I'm Jason Kwasnicki.
Today, Jason, what game are we talking about?
We're talking about Resident Evil 3 remake. Undeserving of a traditional Resident Evil voice intro.
Wow.
Spoilers for the show.
Yeah. Reap the Spoils is a monthly spoiler cast where we pick a game, we come here, and we talk about it. We're going to talk about the story, the gameplay. We're going to spoil everything about this video game. So if you have not played the video game that we're talking about today, which is Resident Evil 3, primarily the 2020 version, I would recommend you pause this episode, go play that video game, and then come back to us and then press play and listen to us ramble on about it. I don't control your life. If you really want to just listen to us talk about it and not play the game, that as is your want, you can do whatever you'd like, but I highly recommend playing the game before listening to us ruin the entire experience for you. Also, something I just want to call out real quick is if you're a longtime Reap the Spoils listener, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. If you would like, share, review, comment, whatever, just engage with us, let us know how we're doing. The feedback is immensely helpful for growing the show, and it makes me feel all warm and fuzzy inside. So that's it. Just give me that positive reinforcement. That's all I'm asking. Okay, and one last note about this episode is we're going to be talking primarily about Resident Evil 3, the one that came out in 2020, the remake, but I do want to open up a bit of a discussion surrounding the original game that came out in 1999. So we will be talking about kind of how the two compare to one another. I think that's an important conversation to have when talking about a game that's a remake like this, where unlike we did an episode on Resident Evil remake, unlike that one, this kind of changes some things pretty radically. Whereas the Resident Evil 1 remake was a very loyal remake that did change things, but like it was more additive changes. It wasn't changes that removed large chunks of core content.
And even 2 remake, it didn't change nearly as much, I think, here.
No, 2 remake.
They actually added stuff.
Yeah,
2 remake was more of a remix of the game. It took that original formula and changed things around, but retained the bulk of the product. It wasn't afraid to try new things. It wasn't afraid to mix things up, but it did keep most of the core the core design, the core structure together. Can't say the same about this one, so stay tuned. But before we get into the game and spoil it, the spoiler cast, reaping the spoils as it were, are we ready for a quick history lesson?
Yes.
Always.
Jason, I know you're ready.
Always, yeah. Let's do it.
All right. So the original Resident Evil 3 came out in 1999 for the PlayStation computer entertainment system, the very first, the PS1. There's a couple different stories you'll hear about this game in terms of its status as a Resident Evil title. Pretty much commonly accepted is that this started as a spin-off and was promoted to a mainline, main numbered series title. And there's a couple different reasons. I've seen why. I'm not going to commit to any of them as the complete and total truth. If you want to dig into that, I definitely recommend doing some research on your own. I've seen the discussion that it has to do with the original title they were planning on having was taking too long in development. The PlayStation 2 had just been announced, and they wanted a game that was further along. I've seen arguments that just like development of the other mainline title just completely wasn't coming together, and this was promoted to mainline title. I feel like there's a couple different variations of the story you'll hear.
Yeah, doesn't it tie in with like what was originally supposed to be Resident Evil 3 was the what we now know RE4, the development hell of that, like the four different versions. Like
That
one of the early versions of RE4 was actually supposed to be RE3.
uh that might be true. I also I think that's also how Devil May Cry came to be.
Right. No, no,
Was
I know that.
Devil May
Yeah.
Cry was supposed to be a Resident Evil title as well. That might have
But
been the planned Resident Evil 4.
yeah,
I could be wrong.
Devil May Cry was originally a version of RE4, but I know there were like four or five different versions of RE4.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. There's the infamous like Hookman one that we'll never see come to fruition, even though that would be cool as hell. But yeah.
I
Point
could be
is,
wrong, but I thought I remembered RE3 for the original being a potential DLC for RE2, but then they just made it its own thing eventually. I could be wrong about that, but I feel like I
That
remember reading that at
that
some point.
yeah, that was like the story that was in like I don't remember what game magazine. It's one of those ones that never became a website, like EGM or something like that.
hmm,
I
and
remember a story like that.
also before anyone starts yelling at Delilah for using DLC when talking about a game that came out in 1999, come on, you know what she means.
Yeah, yeah.
um but anyway, so yeah, the important thing to take away from this is that Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, as it were, because that was the subtitle of the original game, got promoted from side story to main series numbered Resident Evil game. um Jumping ahead to more of a remake centric timeline here. The development of this remake had large overlap with the development of Resident Evil 2. I remember the Resident Evil 2 remake getting announced in like 2015 or 16. Um, and it took a while to get that out. Obviously, it didn't come out until early 2019, but there was significant overlap between the development of these two games. And the Resident Evil 2 remake was primarily developed in house by Capcom's development team. Resident Evil 3 was developed in house by Capcom's development team, but also had a lot of assistance from K2 Inc., which is a subsidiary of Capcom, a developer called Redworks, and a developer called M2. And it was directed by Kiyohiko Sakata. I think I remember seeing M2 was one of the primary developers that worked on this one. I could be wrong about that. Point is, there was a lot more outside help on this game. There was a lot more outsourcing on this game versus the Resident Evil 2 remake. Um and then yeah, the game released a little over a year after Resident Evil 2 remake. It released on April 3rd, 2020 for the PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and PC, and it came to current gen consoles, PS5, Xbox Series X and S, and the Nintendo Switch via cloud streaming in last year in 2022. And yeah, that's our history lesson, guys. So
Great.
yeah, and I bring up the concurrent development thing because contrary to popular belief, it did not take only a year to develop this game. Like it was in development much longer, and or at least longer than a year, and was concurrently done by Resident Evil 2, but not entirely in-house like Resident Evil 2 was.
Yeah, it's also important to keep in mind one of the reasons they probably did that was because the original games there was a lot of overlap in terms of background areas. Even though RE3 does introduce also a lot of um, new areas, I'm talking about the PlayStation One versions. You
Mhm.
do revisit a lot of places from RE2 as well in the original game, which
Yeah.
ironically you don't here, or at
Well,
least you don't in the same way.
you revisit one area from 2 and 3, at least originally, and only one that I can specifically recall and call out. But and it's the same deal here. But it's I just bring it up because I don't want people to think that it only took a year. And also Capcom, they kind of been on a roll with these annual Resident Evil releases, or mostly annual, I should say. We had 7 come out in 2017, 2 come out in 2019. I think DLC for 7 came out in 2018, so in between those
Yeah,
two, and then 3 in 2020.
I'm sure that the business aspect of it did play a role in forcing this to come out as soon as it did after two,
Yeah.
simply because of yearly and quarterly earnings, the way they spread out release dates to pad out those numbers.
And it's also commendable how much Capcom has kind of taken that. They've kind of appropriated the Bethesda approach for themselves, while Bethesda is out here announcing games 6 years ahead of their release dates and then delaying them a whole bunch of times. Looking at you, Starfield.
Damn.
Elder
Where
Scrolls 6, yeah.
Capcom will announce a Resident Evil game and then 6 months later it's out. So they've kind of really been championing that the past several years, and it's much appreciated, and I think it's been highly successful for them.
Hey man, Capcom has been doing all right for themselves, kind of rebuilding that brand the past, not just with Resident Evil, a lot of different franchises.
Yeah, yeah. Street Fighter 6 looking pretty hot, I guess. I don't
And
know.
they
I
also
don't know
got
anything about
Yeah.
fighting games.
yeah. They also got Monster Hunter. They got they kind of like revitalized Devil May Cry too.
Hey, they're bringing a Ghost Trick back. That's awesome. Bringing that back from the dead. So good for them. But anyway, are we ready to talk about the game?
Yeah.
Oh, I am so ready.
This is your this
And the
this is your
irony, before we get into
hold
the
on, hold on, hold on.
just
This is your
what
final warning. This is your final warning. If you haven't played the game and you don't want to listen to us spoil it, pause here, go play the game, then come back. Okay, Jason, feel free to say
I
whatever you're gonna say.
all I was going to say was before we actually get into the game, the irony of all
Okay, okay.
this is that I recommended we play this before the RE4 remake that comes out fairly soon.
Yeah.
Um, and I had not paid attention to the release or reception of this game at all, so I had no idea what I was going into. So the
Well, I
irony of all this is that I recommended we do this episode.
well, I mean, hey, I thought it was a good idea. Our the very first episode of Reap the Spoils is Resident Evil 2 remake, guys. And then we covered the Resident Evil 1 remake, we've covered Resident Evil 7, we've covered Resident Evil Village. We've covered a lot of Resident Evil games, and we're about to cover 4 when the remake for that launches. That's gonna be the next episode, guys. But forget that I said that, so it can be a surprise later. Um, so it kind of would have been weird if we talked about 1, 2, and then 4, and just totally skipped 3.
Yeah, I mean, we
Um,
could have gone with not talking about this one
Yeah,
and everything would
I
have been
know.
fine, but we're being thorough,
I
okay?
I
do,
think
I do
people would have
think,
understood. They would have got the message.
yeah, but okay. So let's get into it a little bit, because I do think there's some stuff worth talking about here. Okay, so
Yes.
like to cover the ending, obviously the big thing that's going to come up within the first few minutes of Resident Evil 4, Raccoon City's no more. It was blown up. Jill and Carlos, they had a chance to save it. They had to get that vaccine to the US government, and then Nikolai, the bastard that he is, totally fucked that up for them. So really the biggest mystery I feel about this game that I want to talk about is Nikolai.
Mm.
In the original game, they make it so that he's working for Umbrella, and he's just there to observe Nemesis as a product, I guess, like a bio weapon under Umbrella. He's there to observe it, take notes, and give that data back to his employer.
And it's still
The,
kind of implied that that's the case here, but it's not as
mm,
clear.
no, no,
Like
no,
you
no, no,
can
no,
find
because
notes.
it's in this game it's changed. He's not employed by Umbrella. I mean, he is, in that he's part of the, what is it, the Umbrella Biohazard Containment Service or whatever. Like
He's much more of
the
his own.
military.
Yeah, he's out for himself in this game more. Like it's to whoever the highest bidder is. It seems.
And yeah, but he specifically mentions that he was hired by someone to collect this data, and
Yeah,
they're going to pay him for it. So the big question I have is, who do you guys think hired Nikolai to do this?
I always default to Wesker just
Right,
because like
and
he has his hands in everything.
that's
that's
probably what
probably
they
the
will
most
end up.
logical
Yeah,
option.
and because
Um,
as we've already kind of seen with the RE4 demo, without spoiling anything, they're definitely with that backfilling minor details to make things make a little more sense that we didn't
Mhm.
get in the originals. So it wouldn't surprise me if they backfill some more Wesker stuff so that as they continue with the story, plot holes from the original releases make more sense.
Yeah, well, I also think that it's been a pretty deliberate choice that the remakes have been doing like some minor deviation, and they kind of almost have their own continuity, which in the end is going to make a lot more sense once 5 remake, 6 remake and so on come out. um assuming that happens, right? Everyone is kind of assuming that after 4 the next up will be 5. I mean, it really should be Code Veronica, because if any game needs to be remade to hopefully make it better, it's Code Veronica, guys.
Mhm.
um but
I
it,
think it is. I think it is their ultimate plan to kind of make these new remakes canonical and connective to 7, 8, and wherever they go next. I think that
it's
is their
possible.
plan, especially because they have this engine now that is pretty reliable that they've been reusing over and
Yeah,
over, and they've gotten pretty good at churning these out. It
and
Oh,
seems
yeah.
it's
like both a
also
good business and creative endeavor, I guess.
Mhm.
kind of just a quick side note. It's kind of insane how well that engine both performs and makes things look
Hmm.
just drop dead gorgeous.
At this point, like, Capcom's the only developer that can release a game in the same series each year, and I won't be annoyed, and I'll always be excited.
Well, because at least it's a new game,
Yeah.
they'll release a new Resident Evil almost on an annual basis, but it's like some of them might be remakes, some of them might be DLC, some of them might be the full original games. But they feel fresh. It doesn't feel like it's rehashed, it doesn't feel like it's re-released stuff. It all feels fresh. And that RE engine is just an absolute powerhouse. It's
Mhm.
replaying this game on PS5 with at 60 frames, I think, with the ray tracing on. It's kind of insane how they were able to get that working.
Yeah,
It just looks so good.
absolutely.
But
Everything's so shiny.
everything is so shiny. But anyway, back to Nikolai. Yeah, so Wesker is probably the most obvious choice. The other option I kind of want to throw out there, and I guess minor spoilers for Resident Evil 7 and 8, is that other rival company, the Connections, I think it
Mm.
was called. Like, could they be existing this early in the timeline, trying to undermine and fuck with Umbrella?
I mean, probably because they had access to the mold, right? And that's
Hmm.
been around apparently since the beginning.
Yeah.
And keep in mind, they do specifically point out that um, Nemesis is a combination of, obviously he's mutated by the T virus, but they also use parasites to control him,
And you know
and
what? I think
that's kind of
that's
part of the mold, isn't it? Like the dangers of creating like a hive mind that can't be cured in the same way that a virus can. They specifically make a point to mention that in the game.
yeah, it's in a note. And that could be making mention of, was the mold a parasite? The mutant.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it
'Cause I
functions in the same way. Yeah.
my first thought was that was more so teasing and tying into Resident Evil 4, which we know moves to parasites.
Hmm.
Um but you could be right. It could be more a connection to the connections, and Resident Evil Village, the Winters saga, if you prefer to refer to it as that. But
I think you're right as well. I think it works well on both levels, and if they are, as I postulated at the beginning, going to continue backfilling things into these remake stories to try to create more connective tissue, it would make sense to go in that direction to give Las Plagas in 4 a bit more relevance to the overarching story of the entire
yeah,
series, if indeed they are trying to connect the Winter's story with the OG stories.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, until we see, I guess until Resident Evil 4 is out, and then maybe we see where they're going after that. Like, it's all speculation. It's all up for interpretation. Who could have hired him, and what his end goal was? At least whom he's selling that data to. Um, but Nikolai is a villain. What did you guys think? Um, of him just as a bad guy.
He's kind
Man.
of a ham-fisted way to try to put a message in the game that corporations are bad because they're greedy, which we already knew greed was bad. Like it was unnecessary. I felt. I don't know. It's
I
weird. You also get. I guess we'll talk. I see it's later in your notes, but the original game handles it a bit differently. There's choice involved.
Yeah,
Um,
that's something I definitely want to talk about later in the game or later in the episode, but
but it
um
seems like when they were like trying to write like the story elements of this game seems like there was a lot of scrambling going on because it's like Nikolai isn't really present, and then towards the end of the game, he becomes very present, and it's like, and then the game ends with Jill saying, like, what destroyed us was greed, and it's like, okay, yeah, like that's a message, and I guess it works, but that's kind of like an overarching thing of the series. Like, you didn't need to make your entire villain and game about it. There were more interesting, I guess, other areas to delve into. I don't know.
yeah. Well, I mean, that it's like it's just kind of an unoriginal angle, right? But I enjoy him as I enjoy his rapport that he has with Jill in that he's framing him being a villain any time he shows up to talk to Jill. It's like he's trying to act as if he's teaching her a lesson about looking out for
Mhm.
yourself. And
Yeah,
I kind of like that angle because
I, I would like that angle if the Jill in this game was the Jill from the OG games, but this is not the same Jill Valentine, and we'll get into that.
well, we can get into that now. Let's talk about Jill. Oh, Delilah, sorry. Did
No,
you
I
have
was
Yeah,
just gonna say, I mean, what is Nikolai aside from someone who does a job for money? Like, I don't really see any like motives beyond that.
Yeah, it's like him as a villain isn't interesting, but him as a character kind of
Yeah.
is, you know? Just the way he kind of frames his motivations and his interactions with Jill are what make him interesting, but his motivation itself, his the whole greed message being bad, like yeah, it's not original and it's not done in a particularly profound way.
Yeah. But
yeah,
sorry, what
and
were you gonna say about Jill?
Well, let's talk about Jill.
well, the reason I say that you would be right if it was the original Jill, because the original Jill was essentially defined by her selflessness and compassion. A good comparison for anybody who's actually read the books, the Harry Potter books, Jill Valentine is essentially Ginny Weasley in the books, where she's essentially defined by herself. It's just the most popular character I could think of, where just
Okay,
fiercely
okay.
loyal, compassionate, but she's willing to kick ass if she has to defend her friends. But she's defined by her selflessness and compassion for others. And I understand that for book readers, you'll know that it might be a bad comparison because movie Ginny Weasley is awful, but and not at all a representation of the books. But
Okay.
the point being is that Jill Valentine is defined by her compassion and selflessness, which would have played really well with Nikolai and the whole him being greedy, because it's a foil. It's a
Well,
completely opposite characters. Jill in this game, well, it's not Jill Valentine. It's just a cliche idea of what Twitter millennials think a badass, stoic female character should be. Like, the extent of her dialogue is, all right, let's find a swear word that works in this sentence and use it when she does talk. In the original game, she talks a lot and she's constantly worried about people.
I
It's oh my god, it's
I don't agree with that.
she
I
and
like
the worst part is that she ping pongs in some scenes. She'll seem just doughy eyed and stupid, and then in the next scene, she'll be spewing like fucking swear words and some conception of a
well,
badass
okay.
action movie
I
dialogue
think
scene.
and we talked about this in our Resident Evil 1 episode when we talked about Resident Evil 1 remake. And the question I asked you guys was does this game need to be remade again to bring it up to the same kind of standard they've set for these other modern remakes? And we all pretty universally said no, right? But also the Jill we were familiar with prior to Resident Evil 3, this modern remake Resident Evil 3, like they're I mean, we're talking about this potentially being like kind of a separate canonical continuity. Um, the character, I mean, even we even talk about Resident Evil 2. I feel like the Leon there is different from the Leon in original Resident Evil 2, and definitely different from the Leon that is in original Resident Evil 4, and
Don't
seemingly the
shoot me,
remake
I'm a
version.
human.
So like, like it's just kind of a different take on the characters that's more modernized
Yeah.
with more modernized dialogue. But
No,
like I don't think that she's a completely different character in the sense that like she's no longer compassionate. I think we're it put in her shoes in this game. The first person that helps her is working for the company she's actively trying to take down,
yeah,
and
yeah, no, I
she's
know.
working with people that are working in that company. I don't blame her for kind of being a little hostile and crass toward them, because in her eyes they're the ones that are at fault for the reason the whole city's gone to shit.
All right, so
I
to be,
also
oh, sorry, go ahead, Delilah.
No, I was just gonna say I also feel like I don't remember Jill from the original RE3, but obviously like not just in terms of character, but also in combat, she's a lot more seasoned. She's been through shit. You know, she already dealt with the Spencer mansion, and now she's
Right.
here like trying to save Raccoon City as much as she can, and take down Umbrella. So I just feel like she's just a lot more like gruff in this remake. I don't remember how she was in the original, but I didn't mind it because I really liked the voice actress for her, and I really like her design. So, but I will agree with you, Jason. There was really a lack of dialogue, and I felt like they could have done more to like make Jill, because like I feel like Jill's one of the best characters, and I just didn't
She
don't
is.
feel like we got that in
She's
this game,
if
and
you think
it's
about it,
because they
she's like,
cut so much shit.
yeah, if you think about it, in many ways, she's like a lot of people would assume Chris Redfield is like the protagonist, but in many ways, it's actually her. Like to the point where, like in later games, she's kind of the plot quest item, so to speak. They're looking for her, but don't get me wrong. Like I'm not saying that like she needs to be nice all the time. That's not what I mean. Like as I said, I used the Ginny Weasley comparison because Ginny Weasley is known for getting like fiercely defensive of her friends. In the original game, that's how she was like. She was very compassionate, helpful, but she was also selfless. She was willing to turn on a dime and do what she needed to do and give it her all to defend her friends. And to be charitable to the writers here, I can see what they're going for. And Mark, you kind of alluded to this with the traumatized warrior trope, where
Yeah,
they're
well
trying to portray
that is
her.
a
Oh,
that
sorry.
is a big no, I'll just build off of that, because that is something we haven't really dove into yet. Um, she's she's suffering from PTSD after the Spencer mansion, and like you survive something like that, who the hell wouldn't? You know, I totally get it, and I liked that angle. The game, it's interesting way to open up the game is first of all, they fake you out by making you think, oh, this is gonna be like a Ethan Winters game. We're in first person mode right now.
Hmm.
And she's kind of got this internalized fear of being infected and becoming one of the zombies, and that's a really interesting evolution to do to her character in this remake continuity, versus in Resident Evil 3, the original Resident Evil 3, PS1 1999 Resident Evil 3 just kind of opens up with her talking about like, city's gone to shit, I gotta get out of here, this is my last escape, and she just like, jumps out of her apartment and runs down an alleyway and kills a zombie or two, and that's kind of this is in my opinion, this is a much more interesting opening to a much more interesting character. And I also think, Jason, like, she is compassionate in this. I do think it go like I said, she's working with, in her eyes, the enemy, and it takes some time for her to warm up to and realize Carlos isn't my enemy, Tyrell isn't my enemy, Mikhail isn't my enemy. These guys are they are actively oblivious to what Umbrella's done. They are actively trying to help, and she warms up to that.
Right.
When everything goes to shit on the train, she doesn't want Mikhail to sacrifice himself, and I'm sure she's really thankful of that. Who's the first person she contacts? Carlos. And she Carlos helps her out, and she helps him out in the end. She doesn't want to shoot Nikolai on the rooftop because she doesn't want to shoot Carlos.
Right.
I think she's more compassionate in this than you're giving her credit for, and to an extent I get the hostility at the beginning. Like, I could see being a little jarring for Jill Valentine, but I think that's only because Capcom and the Resident Evil teams have kind of screwed over her character for a long time,
Yes,
whereas
this goes
they've
back to
given
Resident Evil 5. Won't get into spoilers, but there was a lot
yeah,
of
like,
controversy there. Yes.
in general, they've just given Chris the spotlight game after game after game, and Jill just she like that's why there's a new Resident Evil movie coming out. It's either a movie or a series, Resident Evil Death Island, and there was a ton of hype surrounding that first trailer. And granted, like, some of these CG movies, like, they're kind of hit or miss. Some of them are okay, some of them are pretty bad. Um but there's a lot of hype around this one because Jill's in it. People are excited just because they get to see more Jill. And
Because
that's
Jill, at least the OG Jill, is just an by default, because of her personality, a more likable character than
Well,
Chris
yeah,
was.
I mean, it's half because she's a great character and a lot of people like her, but it's also half because we haven't fucking seen her in a
That too.
new
Yeah.
Resident Evil storyline since Resident Evil 5.
Yep.
Or not, sorry, Revelations. Sorry, Revelations. But even then, Revelations was only a few years after 5. It's been a long ass time since we saw Jill in a new storyline.
So
Whereas they keep rehashing Chris. Chris keeps coming back. So
to try to be charitable and fair to the writers, I do understand what they're trying to do. They're, as I said, they're trying to do the traumatized warrior. They're trying to do the Ellen Ripley in Aliens or Sarah Connor in T2 trope.
mhm.
However, the problem, and on paper, I agree with you, and I like that, and I especially like it with the direction that they went in with Carlos in the game, and it could have worked beautifully. However, it's all about the execution. So
Yeah.
while on paper, I do agree with you that it's a really good idea to have her almost as a mentor dealing with their own issues to the naive Carlos, who doesn't know what he's getting into, and that could have worked beautifully. You'll notice that in movies that they're obviously trying to emulate with this character in this game, like Aliens or Terminator 2.
Yeah.
Yes, the characters are very stoic, but it's also very clear that they're dealing with stuff, and like having her, like, the problem again is in the little dialogue she's given. It's usually her swearing and cussing and never actually being afraid of Nemesis, the titular character of the original game.
Well,
Whereas when you compare that to, say, a character like Ellen Ripley or Sarah Connor, they are dealing with deep seated fears and they deal with it, or the problem is that they're trying to deal with it with anger or being standoffish, and it's by opening up. And by the end, when you have like that famous line in Aliens, "Step away from her, you bitch," like they use the swearing to emphasize that it's a major character turning point. In this, it's like whenever whatever little dialogue we get from Jill, it's just some combination of a swear and her trying to sound like a badass, but it just sounds like somebody on Twitter trying to sound
I
like a
don't
badass. And
I really don't think it's that bad. I don't did we play two different games? I don't remember it being this bad, and I just replayed it.
it's like
I don't know.
because like half of her dialogue is just some shit that she says to Nemesis, which we'll talk about. Nemesis undermines Nemesis as a
I don't
core element of the game. It's like,
well,
take a hint, you fucker. Oh, burn, you fucker. Now my turn, fucker. It's like that's half her dialogue, and
okay,
it
okay,
kind of undermines.
fine.
It kind of undermines the idea that she's traumatized and is dealing with deep seated fear.
Well,
You know what I
okay.
mean?
Counterpoint to that, though. Counterpoint to that. She's not afraid of Nemesis. She fought Tyrant, right? Like, he's just another more advanced Tyrant. I don't think she's afraid of him. She's afraid of the virus itself.
Hmm.
she's initially maybe a little shaken by the fact that this fucking 8 foot tall beast plows through her apartment building trying to get her, but like she's overall not afraid that much of Nemesis. It's the infection that's what she has nightmares about, right? Even toward the end of the game, where she wakes up, right before she wakes up in the hospital, cured of the T virus, because she does get infected in this game. She doesn't have a nightmare about Nemesis. She has a nightmare that Carlos comes in and he's infected and attacks her.
Hmm.
Like that's what she's afraid of. That's the deep-seated fear. So like her fighting Nemesis and just cursing at him, not really being afraid of him, that doesn't bother me, because it makes sense why she wouldn't be afraid of him.
Well, I mentioned that to illustrate that half of her dialogue is just her saying those really bad one-liners to Nemesis, but all and it in
Well,
so
also, but isn't
and
that
it also has the side effect of undermining Nemesis, which we'll get to. But Nemesis is also supposed to be the embodiment of that fear, like
to
from a mechanical storytelling perspective or perspective. Yeah.
to be fair to the dialogue, Jason, there were worse ways that this game undermines Nemesis than Jill's dialogue
Oh,
in it.
sure. No, no. Yeah. I'm not. I just because we're talking about Jill, I just wanted to
Yeah,
put it in there
yeah.
that it's a big factor. Um,
The one thing I'll say that this game that is an absolute travesty is that this game wasted the "you want stars, I'll give you stars" line
yeah.
in passing. Like they completely wasted
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
That's the last thing she says to Nemesis in the original game, when she's just one hand firing a fucking magnum at his nearly deceased head. She says that, and it's like one of the most badass lines in video game history, and it's just totally wasted in this game.
Yeah.
I
I
guess
guess
because they wanted to do things differently, so they didn't want to use the line in the same place. No, 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 no. Use that line where it belongs. That is the cheesy ending one-liner that we need this game to end on, not as a throwaway when she's running away from him.
I guess to summarize very quickly what I'm trying to get at, the original Jill, compassionate, confident, loyal, just very, very likable character. I understand on paper what they were trying to do with Jill here, and on paper, I actually think it's a good idea. And I love Ellen Ripley and Sarah Connor, two of my favorite characters of all time.
Yeah.
It's just
The
not
execution
executed
just didn't
well.
work for you.
Yeah, the execution just not only fell flat, it actively ruined many things, many elements of the story for me.
Delilah,
I ended up liking Carlos better as a character, and we'll get into why later. But like I
yeah.
and that shouldn't be a thing. I shouldn't like Carlos better than Jill Valentine.
Delilah, what are your thoughts on Jill in this game? I
I,
feel
I
feel like this is just Jason and I arguing with each
yeah,
other.
no, no. I mean, I think had she had more interactions with more characters aside from just Carlos and Nemesis, maybe we would have seen more of that compassionate side or
Yes,
a little bit more about her.
that's another
But
thing is that in the original game it's much larger and she does interact with a lot more, not a lot more,
a
but
lot
more
more
people.
characters, yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm. Okay, I mean, let's keep rolling. Let's talk about Carlos and why Jason liked him more. I guess Jason really doesn't want to live in a Carlosless world.
no, I do not. No, I so again as I mentioned earlier, like it would if you're going to do the traumatized um, and now kind of veteran warrior with Jill, having Carlos be the naive, although it's weird because he's clearly shown in the cutscenes to be like better trained for combat than Jill. But to have him, you get what I'm saying, to
I
be
don't
naive.
know if I agree with that either. But go ahead.
Anyway, the point I'm trying to make, to have him be her foil and that he's naive, he thinks he's doing a great thing by working for Umbrella and trying to save people,
Hmm.
and then realizing the truth. Like he has more of a character arc, I feel like, in this game than Jill did. The
Well,
remake, that
yeah,
is.
no, that absolutely, because he thinks he's on the correct side of things. He thinks he's working for a good company, and he slowly starts to realize, like, oh shit, like he does as he's on his mission. He's kind of he's you're playing as him. You're reading notes, and he's kind of coming to the conclusions that, oh, what Jill told me was right. Umbrella's fucked up.
Right.
We are not the good guys, or I am not. I at the very least, I am not working for the good guys. You know, and that's a conclusion he kind of comes to on his own.
He's just more likable than Jill in this. He has corny one-liners, which harken back to Resident Evil of old. He's not like full of himself. He's got a humble personality. He calls Jill a super cop. It's just I don't know. He's just a likable action hero. He's not anything like super special. I'm not saying he's like super great or particularly well written. He just stands
Well,
out as like something tolerable in this.
yeah, but I think the way he's portrayed in the original.
Tolerable.
Wait, what was that?
He said tolerable.
The way he's portrayed in the original game, I think is fine. Like he's mostly a throwaway, forgettable character that's just
Right.
kind of like someone if to facilitate that story. Whereas here, like I actively want more Carlos. I
Yes.
want them to bring back Carlos in something because his chemistry with Jill is very, very good,
Right.
and he is a much more fun and interesting character this time around. Just because of that arc that they provide. Also, to just comment on the cheesy one-liners, the line that will never fail to make me laugh is when he's in the Raccoon City Police Department. You go up to one of the doors, um, with one of the card suits on it. You know how the Raccoon City Police Department had the diamond door, the spade door, or whatever.
Yeah.
In the lobby when because Tyrell's in there. If you go up to one of those doors and try to open it, Carlos just shouts out, "Now here's a weird fucking door."
Yeah. I love that.
Fucking cracks me up. Just the delivery of it, and Tyrell's just like, "Ignore it. Go find the doctor." Uh
Not just more time with Carlos, but more time with Carlos and Jill together. Again,
yeah.
I see I see the character archetypes they're setting up and what they're trying to do with them, and on paper I like it all. It's just it doesn't have enough time. It's not well executed. It feels rushed. Like the game overall, it took like time to beat says on average it's like 4 hours. Um, I think it ended up taking me like 5 hours because I left it paused a lot for various reasons. Like, there's not much here, and it could have worked with more time, more
we'll we'll
interactions with these characters.
yeah, we'll definitely talk about that um a little later. Delilah, anything you want to talk about with regards to Carlos?
No, I agree. He's likable, but once again, it's just one of those things where there wasn't much going on in this game. There could have been a lot more in terms of story and gameplay. That just feels like I don't know, it feels a little throwaway for me, RE3 remake,
Yeah,
honestly. It's not
yeah.
very memorable.
Well, I guess let's talk the moment everyone's been waiting for. Let's talk about the big lad. Let's talk about Nemesis.
Hmm.
Um, I do want to just throw out there. I this in a lot of these modern Resident Evil games, this and this is probably maybe it might be tied for my least favorite, if not my least favorite of the modern Resident Evils. But I do think the opening cutscene to this one is one of the most chilling and well executed opening cutscenes to one of these modern games. Where it's a lot of news broadcasts and news stories about the virus breaking out in Raccoon City, and at the same time, you're seeing some scientists from Umbrella talk on television about how they're trying to save lives, and at the same time, you're seeing scenes interspersed of them developing Nemesis, and you just see these brief like fast cuts of him. You see the weird eyeball, and you get the long shot of like the coffin that he's in, and at the very end of it you briefly see codename Nemesis until it just fades to black.
Yeah,
It's expertly done, it's chilling, it's creepy, and it's the perfect setup for this game.
yeah, I do like how they're trying to ground in these remakes and in the series in general. They're trying to ground Umbrella more and make it less of like a cartoony villainous organization and more of a like this could be a big pharma company in real life, or like a military industrial complex.
Well,
Any of those big, you know what I'm saying?
not only ground Umbrella, but just ground the game, like somewhat more in reality. A lot of the clips in that opening that I talked about, part of the reason it's so effective is a lot of it's live action.
Right.
It's kind of similar to what they did at the beginning of Metal Gear Solid 4, where you can get there's like several, like a set of 5 or 6 or so, like real live action filmed like commercials to kind of set up the world for that game. And it's talking about like the war economy, and just contextualizing the climate of war and the world that it's in. And this is kind of doing the same thing with a similar approach, having live action, having actual people report on these things as if they're actually happening. It was just super effective for me, and I really, really loved it. And again,
Yeah.
ending on that chilling shot where the last thing you see is the code name Nemesis label on the container, and it immediately fades to black. You almost don't even get a chance to read it. It's just so chilling.
Yeah,
Um,
that was really cool, and it also, like, puts a lot of pressure on you when you're playing as Jill, like, you know you just don't have that much time left to, like, save Raccoon City because they're gonna fucking bomb the shit out of it,
Hmm.
yeah,
and so you have to get done what you need to get done in, like, a very short amount of time. That's, like, a lot of pressure, and you feel that intensity in the beginning of the game, and then it kinda just dies, I think, as soon as you leave, the city, and same thing with Nemesis. His he I mean, I was more scared. Mr. X is like a sort of a lesser version of him. Like you got Nemesis, he's like he talks, he has flamethrowers coming out of nowhere. Like
well,
he
he he talks, but he only says star.
Yes, but like he's faster, like you know, he runs after you a lot quicker than Mr. X unless you're playing on hard mode, then Mr. X seems like he runs, but he's just like he seems what should be scarier than Mr. X. But it was only in the beginning of the section of the game that I was actually scared of him.
Yeah, well, and this is talking about Nemesis is gonna kind of half talk about and Nemesis as he is in the story, and half Nemesis as he is as a gameplay mechanic. Um he In the original game, like there's random spots where he will show up out of nowhere, but you're also in the city significantly long, like the city proper in downtown Raccoon City. You're there for a significantly longer period of time than you are in this remake. And the majority of the times Nemesis shows up, they're all scripted. And
Yes.
that really takes like they did the Nemesis thing in Resident Evil 2, where Mr. X is roaming the halls of Raccoon City Police Department, and you can take you can take precautions to try and avoid him. You know, you can not run around so that he won't hear your footsteps and stuff. Like that stuff is baked into the game. It's kind of weird that Nemesis in the original release, that was the selling point, right? Like this dude could pop out at any random time and
Yeah,
fuck your day up.
Mr. X in remake and RE2 remake
Yeah.
feels more like the original
Yeah,
Nemesis.
well, that's what I'm saying is
Yeah,
it's kind of funny and ironic that that was the selling point on the PS1 for Resident Evil 3, that this dude will he'll just randomly show up and you got to deal with him
and
and
not only
run
will he
away from him.
randomly show up, but it was a big deal back in 1999 when the first game came out. Like you couldn't just run to the next area and he wouldn't. He fought like it was a big deal when people found out. Oh
Yeah.
shit, he follows you across areas, and he's got
Mhm.
a rocket launcher. He's shooting at you the entire time. Like that was a big deal.
Yeah, here like there's a brief moment while you're running around Raccoon City, downtown, the downtown of the city, where he might randomly show up or he does pursue you. It's not long, and afterwards everything is scripted.
Yeah,
Every
Yes.
interaction, every boss fight, it's all scripted stuff, and that's a huge wasted opportunity for
especially
something so
because
cool.
um, I'm trying to remember like how much you had to put into him in the original game because he's super easy to deal with when he shows up in this game.
In this
They
game, yeah.
they liberally spread out these electric things you can put one shot in, and it
Mm.
effectively takes him out long enough for you to get away. He completely goes down with one grenade, which we'll talk about ammo economy in this game, but that should be everybody should have a grenade an extra grenade to chuck at him. And once you do that, take him out. Don't have to worry about him for a while. For almost depending on how you play it, almost the entire game, except for the boss fight, the scripted boss fights.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like I said, he only free roams and pursues you for a very brief period of
Right.
time when you're in downtown Raccoon City.
And
Um,
it's worth parallel or not parallel contrasting that in the original game. The game starts where you're walking through the apartments, you see zombies, and the first normal person I think you meet is you're in that garage area, and there's a guy, but he won't leave, and Jill tries to get him to leave, and you can actually
yeah.
come back there later and find him dead. There's build up to Nemesis in the original game. You don't see him right away. You
Well,
you meet your partner, and he tells you that somebody's chasing him,
yeah.
and then you encounter him in the RCPD. I believe is the first time, right? He jumps through the window.
Just outside of our RPD, but I'm not gonna hold that against the remake, because I do think the opening is really cool. How she, like, there is some suspense. The phone is ringing off the hook. I mean, it's a very brief moment of suspense. It's more of a very abrupt surprise. But I do think the opening section where he's crashing through the apartments is overall cool. It's followed by an extremely linear set of hallways, and then that's kind of like the whole first act of the game, and I think that's really disappointing. But I think that intro, you remove the suspense, but I think what we got was still a worthy replacement, I guess.
It also harkens to a core issue I have with the game as a game, in that it feels at odds on whether or not it wants to be an action game or survival horror.
Well, to be
Um,
fair, that's been Resident Evil since Resident Evil 4, Jason.
well,
Actually,
well,
no. Since the original Resident Evil 2.
Yes.
but well, I think RE2 remake nailed the survival it being a survival horror game, and here there's so many scripted action sequences and on rails things that and tiny moments where I think it's a cutscene, but if I'm
Well,
not paying attention, you'll die and have to restart over from the save. And then like the gameplay elements of the actual survival horror sections, and we'll get to that again. I mentioned ammo economy, one thing, but it,
two
so it starts. The point I'm trying to make is that it starts bombastically, where you meet Nemesis right at the beginning. He breaks through the wall in your apartment, as opposed to the original game where there's build up to him. I did not like that. You just said you were a fan of it. I absolutely hated that opening apartment sequence. Did not work for me at all. It felt almost like contrived, like Jill had all the plot armor in the world. Like like he's literally taking the ceiling of the hallway and ramming it against you, and it's like he just stops at the right time so you can press forward on the stick to keep moving. It's I don't know, Delilah. What did you think of the opening sequence with Nemesis?
I thought it was fun. I didn't mind it. I wasn't critical of it. More so, I just thought it was like, wait, why are you laughing?
I just love that subtle dig at Jason. Like, I wasn't critical of it.
No, I mean, like, sometimes, like,
Delilah, feel
with
free to be
Resident
critical
Evil,
of
no,
me.
I know, I don't mind it. Actually, I like it. It's just for me, like sometimes when I see stuff like that, especially in a Resident Evil series, I kind of just take it as it is, like as just being ridiculous, and I kind of just roll with it.
A lot of the series is. It's
True. The only reason I bring up the plot armor and it feeling ridiculous is precisely because with these remakes, they seem to have been trying to ground it so much.
I'll
So
give you the
Yeah.
plot armor thing. It was
tonally, it clashes,
it was
and
excessive
it's
how
not
much
just
damage Jill took. I'll agree
yes,
with that.
it's not just this opening sequence either. It happens again and again
Oh
and
yeah,
again.
I
Yeah,
agree. I agree. I will agree with you there that Jill takes Jill takes a lot of hurt, and yet she's like totally
it
fine.
it made more. It feels so like when it comes to like suspension of disbelief and like plot armor feeling in the original games, those were like when you're running from Nemesis, it's all gameplay. So like it feels a little more not believable, but just you're playing it. It's part of the game.
Yeah.
Here, when it's a scripted, cutscene or interactive sequence, that's taken away from it.
Yeah, I'll agree 100% with that. There's just largely way too many scripted planned sequences in this game that just make it feel like a linear succession of events rather than a Resident Evil game. And Resident Evil, a large part of Resident Evil has always been that exploration. Exploration bit, and there's only one really big beefy chunk of exploration in this game. The rest are kind of minor ones that that are over and done with before anything interesting happens. The sewers, it's you go down one path, you go down another path, you get a key, and then you can basically make your way out 5 minutes later. They cut we'll talk more about content missing, but one of the biggest fan complaints about this remake, the clock tower sequence, the clock tower level, it's totally cut. Instead, they just do a scripted boss fight outside of it, and then it moves along to the next story beat.
Yeah, just to give people context who haven't played the original, that was a big moment. So that helicopter that you try to get to in the remake at the top of the parking garage before you drive into Nemesis and plow
Hmm.
over him and all of it. So in the original game, you're calling in the rescue helicopter, it's coming to the clock tower, and it gets shot down by Nemesis with his rocket launcher, and then there's a cutscene of him just standing on top of that clock tower with his rocket launcher, and it really cemented him kind of as that antagonistic force.
But the whole lead up to that was a Resident Evil level. You were
Right.
solving puzzles and finding things that you needed in order to progress in that clock tower. It was a full Resident Evil level. Here's a scripted boss fight and moves on to playing as Carlos in a hospital.
And again, that all plays back to like this feel like people, and you mentioned in the beginning that there was more than a year of dev time, and that is true.
Yeah.
Regardless, though, I think this is why people feel like this game was rushed.
Well,
Because it's so short, it's so compact. There's not a lot to it.
and the other main reason I brought that up was the majority of the in-house team, the A team at Capcom, was on that Resident Evil 2 remake.
Right.
Um it's weird how we can kind of meta contextualize original Resident Evil 3 was kind of seen as a disappointment in comparison to 2 at the time, and it's the same thing here, not necessarily for the same reasons, but history's kind of repeating itself here. There's lots of reasons people were not disappointed whatsoever with Resident Evil 2 remake. Hell, it was, I think I named it at the time when we did our episode about like our favorite games that year. I think that was my game of the year that year.
Hmm.
Again, at the
Yes.
time. And Resident Evil 3, like I don't it probably didn't even crack my top 5. I mean, 2020 was a great year for games and it didn't crack my
Mhm.
top 5. Um
Yeah.
so it's just interesting to think about that history really is repeating itself that way.
Yeah. They I also remember, like, there were more locations besides the clock tower. They may not
Yes.
have been as
Oh
significant,
yeah.
but I feel like I remember there being just a lot more to the original,
I
The
bring up the
in a
original,
clock
park or
tower.
something.
I
the
bring up the
original
clock
map
tower
might
just
have
cuz
been
it was
bigger than the
the
original RE2 map. Because
well, in the sense,
you had a bunch of city, you had the clock tower, the gas station, the garage.
yeah,
There was a lot. Yeah,
because this was the game that opened it up. Like, you're no longer just confined to a single building for the majority of the game. You have an entire city to explore.
yeah.
Yeah.
And Raccoon City at the beginning of original Resident Evil 3 was your map, and it was, yeah, it was bigger because it was a city versus a building. Um and
But even still, it almost feels like, at least in the remake, the police department felt bigger than the whole entire downtown
Oh,
Raccoon City.
oh no, no,
and
no.
that was only you only are able to explore half of Raccoon City Police Department
Yeah,
Right.
in this game.
and for people who didn't play the original, the in terms of like relative space to the size of your character, there was way more in the original than is in this remake. This remake is far smaller and condensed compared to the original map.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, and that we could talk. I guess can talk more about just missing content in general, because that's the biggest thing. That, and Delilah, you're 100% right. There was a graveyard or cemetery location in the original Totally Cut. Um, there there's a few others, I just can't remember them all off the top of my head. But
Yeah.
the biggest one that people were upset about was the clock tower.
Right.
That's why I call that one out specifically, because a lot of people really love that segment of the original game, and you go to the clock tower here, you just don't do anything in it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they also show you like the gas station that gets blown up in the original. You can see it through an alleyway, like the gas station
Yeah,
sign. Like they try to show it and make references to areas they know, but it's so weird. Like again, goes back to the beginning of they were probably on some kind of timeline, and were
I,
forced.
I just think it. I just think it mostly comes down to the A team wasn't on this game. They
Yeah.
outsourced a lot of this game. I mean, and I'm not against games reusing assets. I mean, I think it's the smart thing to do. And any and all
Hmm.
games should do that. I mean, it's why engines exist, right?
Right.
Why are you going to spend or waste time rendering a basic object when you could just grab the object as it exists in an engine? So, and the Resident Evil games have been reusing assets since Resident Evil 7. Like, there's tons of assets from Resident Evil 7 that are still, I mean, it's all part of the RE engine.
Right.
Hell, I'm sure you can find Resident Evil assets in Devil May Cry 5. I would not be surprised whatsoever. Um
Yeah.
my point being, though, is maps are reused. I mean, the Raccoon City Police Department, it's the same map, and I'm not saying that's a problem. That's smart. Absolutely do that. The issue is, if you're going to reuse so much stuff, I feel like there still also needs to be more new stuff in this game, but there just isn't. There's not a lot here. Even the final location, they reuse Nest. It's a Nest 2. It's a different Nest than the one that you explore in Resident Evil 2, but it's truncated, and it's mostly or no, I shouldn't say mostly the same, but it's pretty similar.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah. No,
um
I have nothing against reusing assets. I completely agree with you with all that. It just seems that between all the different factors that we brought up, that this game, even if it was in the oven longer than people think it was, it there's a reason why people feel like it was rushed.
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, definitely. And the one thing I do want to call out is I guess I don't know if this was an internal justification behind it. Resident Evil 3 did come packaged with a whole multiplayer game called
Yeah, but
Resident
so
Evil
like
Resistance.
Resident Evil 8 I felt like was like substantial in its
Yeah.
content, and they also were, well, they haven't released it, but it was supposed
Well,
to be packaged with a
yeah,
free multiplayer mode.
I think it is out finally now.
It is? Okay,
I think
yeah.
it came out late last year officially. But
Yeah.
you're right. That was a game that was supposed to launch with a whole other, but that still felt like a full video game. And with much more to the extent than this did.
Yeah, exactly. And not only that, but I mean Resistance, like I appreciate them trying that like Dead by Daylight formula with Resident Evil characters, which is a really cool idea because it works. It's survival horror, you know, four survivors, one killer. Yeah, no doubt. Sounds good.
Yeah.
It didn't work as well because there's other games, like I said, Dead by Daylight, that do it better. But yeah, Resistance, although I appreciate them experimenting to it, it doesn't supplement this game. And I'll give them credit. They separated the trophy list, which I completely appreciated
Thank
as a trophy
God.
hunter. Thank you so much. Like
Yeah.
I will praise that forever, but I still feel like it didn't make the game worth it, especially because not everyone really wants to play that mode anyway.
Delilah bringing up the things that only her and I care about.
Yeah,
The trophies. Don't make me play this for trophies, please.
yeah, no. And to the trophy point, I platinumed this game in 2 days, and
Yeah.
like That's replaying it, what, 3 or 4 times, like, on the
I
hardest difficulty and
I think it took me because I think I overachieved. I don't think I had to play every difficulty. I don't think you have to play every difficulty for the plat, but I did because I wanted S ranks on every. But I was to the point where, keep in mind this was an early pandemic game, so
mhm.
we were all home, right? And I would log off of work. I'd go boot up the PlayStation, like a little after 4 o'clock or so, and I was to the point where I was able to knock out a playthrough uh before I had to cook dinner at like 5:30 or something. Like
Oh
I
yeah,
could start from the
Yeah.
beginning and play. I think if we look at my shortest time, it was like an hour and 3 minutes for a playthrough,
especially if you
skipping
play
cutscenes
this,
and shit.
especially if you try to play it as a survival horror where like you're trying to avoid a lot of enemies or as many as you can at least. Yeah, you can run through sections of this.
Yeah, but also with the unlockables, you can get the infinite launcher and stuff. And like
Yeah.
that is something that I'll always praise a Resident Evil game because most Resident Evil games are really good about their unlockables. Like this one has a ton you can get, and it's really enjoyable to do the records that you had to do. Like they could range from being similar to the trophy list, beat the game on Inferno difficulty, or uh, do this puzzle in less than this amount of time or whatever, to things like I think there were some cheesy little things you had to do. I can't remember off the top of my head, but they'd give you points that you could spend on unlockables, and like you could get a lot of really cool stuff, really useful stuff, including like early access to bolt cutters and the lockpick, so you could
Hmm.
actually sequence break. They actively encourage shit like that through these unlockables, and I think that's really really cool. But I do wish it was all in a more substantial and long game, one that even with that stuff would take me longer than an hour to beat.
Yeah, and even if you, like, cut out the extra stuff that they added in RE2 Remake with, like, the orphanage and stuff like that, even if you cut that out from the RE2 Remake, RE2 as a game still felt more substantial than this
Yeah,
as a
no,
whole,
no,
you know?
100%. I mean, just from the fact that RE2, to be clear about the comment I just made, like if the game only took me an hour to beat, but it was actually a test of my knowledge of my skill. Like we've talked about this before with other Resident Evil episodes, where replaying the game becomes a test of how much you learned from that first playthrough. I mean, I definitely talked about it in our Silent Hill episode. I'm name dropping a ton of episodes that we've done. I expect all of the listeners, if you haven't listened to these or played these games, go listen to these episodes. We have a
Yeah, just
lot.
go
This
listen.
is
It's a win win. You get to understand what we're talking about, and we get views. Yeah, or listens.
Yeah.
win-win. That's exactly right. This is a symbiotic relationship. But my point is, like, if this was a game that took an hour, but it was a test of my skills, in Resident Evil 2, it was like you knew you needed a key, and so you had to remember that, and then okay, in order to get to that key, you need this item, and you know where that item is, and there's lots of thought, there's lots of planning that goes into that, and if that takes you an
There's also
hour,
puzzles like locks and codes that
right,
you could memorize. Yeah, it's
and
a test of skill. Yeah,
it's a test of skill, it's a test, and a test of skill, a test of memory, a test of a lot of things, and so speed running is less just how fast can you do it, it's how much can you remember. I know I've said this about in our Silent Hill 1 episode, where that's like a common survival horror
survival
trope, I
horror. Yeah,
feel.
it's part of the genre. It's almost like min maxing in RPGs, but you're min
Yeah.
maxing the survival horror elements. Yeah,
Right, because so much of it is puzzle solving. So the replayability comes in. How fast can you do it? And the speed is not just how fast can you go through this sequence of events. It's, do you remember where everything is so you can do it as fast as possible. Um, this game, that aspect is lost so early on, and it so quickly becomes just a linear sequence of events that it's speed running it. It's quick, it's fast, but it's kind of boring. Because
Yeah.
you're just not testing yourself. You're not quizzing yourself on, okay, where do I need to go to get this thing? The puzzles, there's barely any, and they're so simple. Another thing that it was like, I feel like almost half of the puzzles, definitely at least a quarter of the puzzles in this game, because there's really not many. And I definitely talked in our Resident Evil 2 episode about how much I loved the locker locks and the safes and finding the combos and stuff, like, because it didn't test me so much as I just needed to use some observation skills, of at least picking up a note and getting the combination. Or there was the one whiteboard in the one room in the police department that had a locker combo on it. Those are reused for this when you're in
Hmm.
the Raccoon City Police Department, and that's like a quarter of the puzzles in this game.
Yeah, and like
There's
one of the big puzzles of the game, it literally tells you the solution right next to the puzzle
Oh yeah,
with
the
the
train,
railroad
right?
map. Yeah, the train
Yeah,
route. Yeah,
that's the only major puzzle I can think of. And I mean, it's kind of cool how you kind of have to learn how to do it, but like it doesn't take long, and it's not a substantial puzzle. And it's just really disappointing, guys.
Yeah, I
Like,
feel like in a lot of Resident Evil games, there's always like at least one or two puzzles that like you remember standing out. And in this
mhm.
game, I didn't remember any. I'm like looking at them right now, and they seem like the most basic of basic Resident Evil puzzles.
and
And
keep in mind a lot of in the original RE3, and maybe that's where a lot of this got lost in translation. In the original RE3, a lot of the puzzle elements were mixed in with the combat with Nemesis, for particular encounters. So one encounter you had to position Nemesis close to a tank so that Carlos could shoot it, so that the acid could spill onto him. Um, the final boss fight with him, you have to move around and position the batteries, and then position Nemesis to be in front of the laser cannon. It's not like this game where you just pick it up and shove it in his mouth. And
yeah,
there was
but
also a time. There was also a timer element. You had to complete everything before Raccoon City got blowed up.
yeah. Um, yeah, I agree. And there's a couple things in there that I do want to circle back to and talk about. There is one thing that I meant to mention earlier, when talking about um Jill in this game versus like Leon and Claire in 2, is that Jill is, she is a trained professional, right? And one of the new
She's a super
mechanics they
cop.
add to super cop. One of the new mechanics that they add to the gameplay. One of the only new mechanics they add to the gameplay of this versus Resident Evil 2, which, why fix what ain't broke, is like that light dodge mechanic that they give her, which isn't much, but it kind of shows that she's a little more proficient in what she does than Leon or Claire. Leon being a rookie cop on his first day on the job, Claire being a college student. Um, like they kind of, that's kind of why Jill is, I guess, taking on these impossible odds with minimal issue. They acknowledge, and I also think that that's why this game is a lot more, it gets away a little more with being a lot more action heavy than 2 was, because Jill is a combat professional. She knows what she's doing, and they're kind of, they know they can kind of lean more into that with this game. It's also why it's the same way in the original,
Hmm.
versus the original
No, I
RE2.
agree. And you mentioned that people didn't like the original RE3 compared to
Yeah.
two, and the additional action elements, and some people didn't like Nemesis. I remember those being
Yeah.
reasons why people complained. Um,
Yeah, and to
I
be
actually
fair,
didn't.
the
Oh, all I was gonna say was like I felt like the dodge mechanic was really finicky in this. Like
it
sometimes it just didn't
it,
work for me.
that's exactly what I was about to get to. It was
Yeah,
worse than the original, because they added pretty much the same thing, but it's so finicky, so hard to master, so hard to pull off. Here, at least, like, it works a little better, and they give kind of like a witch time mechanic thing, where if you time it just right and you get a perfect dodge, like, the time slows down and you get to get a good shot in. It all,
it's also weird here too, though. Like especially with Carlos, because Carlos it's actually a punch. You hit the
yeah,
enemy if you execute it right, but half the time Carlos just starts punching air. Like he's not even hitting the enemy. It's weird. I don't know.
yeah,
I ended up only using it if I had to. I used it more for movement than anything else. Like just
yeah.
moving faster.
I
Mhm.
will say the action still doesn't go as hard as every time you play as Chris Redfield in like any game. That's
Well,
when the
Yeah,
action like goes over the top in those games. Even
yeah,
for a game like Resident Evil 8 that like the beginning felt very survival horror, the minute you play as Chris, that's it. It's an action game.
yeah. Yeah. Um, but yeah, I just wanted to circle back and talk about that because I meant to bring it up earlier. Um, yeah, I mean, is there much else we've got? Oh yeah, Jason, you bring up the railgun at the end of the game. I do want to talk about like some of the boss fights, some of the boss encounters, because like some of them are pretty cool, some of them are pretty just dull and forgettable. But I do think the climax at the end, shoving the railgun into Nemesis' mouth and blowing him inside out, was a really fucking cool spectacle.
Yeah,
Um,
that was really cool. That
it's
fight itself was annoying, especially on harder difficulties, but
yeah,
then once you did that, it felt really satisfying. Like,
it made up for a lousy boss fight because it's a glowy eye boss fight, right? You got to
Yeah,
push these battery things in. He's got some glowy things that you can shoot to stun him, so you can push them in. It's not doing anything interesting. It just ends in the coolest fucking way, in my
yeah.
opinion.
I thought all of the Nemesis boss fights generally were kind of lackluster, including that one. And I will give you from a spectacle perspective, it is cool. I guess it kind of does harken back to some of the more over the top stuff like punching boulders. Jill just picking up the railgun and shoving it in his face. But again, my problem with it more lies narrative. It doesn't feel earned to me.
Okay,
Like
okay.
that could have been like the step away from her, you bitch. Go, referencing aliens. Like
Hey,
it could have been that kind of moment.
once again, this is where Jill should have said, "You want stars? I'll give you stars."
No, I
oh
agree
yeah,
with
that
you.
would have been perfect.
That's where that line belonged.
And if she hadn't been, cussing and quipping the entire time, and it built up to that, I think it would have been better. But that's just
Yeah.
me.
I say it's like some of the boss fights. I think every boss fight in this game was against Nemesis, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
And
which
like
is
in
not the case in
general,
the original. In the original, I think there was a few other
there's like a
extraneous.
worm thing you fight, and I
Yeah.
think that's the only
Oh, weren't there like
non-Nemesis.
spiders or something?
Well,
Oh,
yeah,
there
there's
were spiders in
spiders.
this game, but like bigger spiders.
Yeah, there were spiders in the original. The clock tower sequence, I think, had its own boss aside from Nemesis. I think that's the worm you're referring to. If
No, I think the worm is in
maybe it was
the
the spider. I don't remember.
cemetery. I think the worm is in the cemetery, but I could be
I'm having
mistaken.
trouble remembering. Yeah,
Yeah, it's been a long ass time.
I just remember very vividly the Nemesis sequences, like I referenced earlier,
Hmm.
just because of, they are pretty unique in the gameplay mechanics that are in and of themselves kind of puzzles. Um, but yeah, boss fight wise, this was pretty lackluster, even compared to two, which I think two did the most, like did better than I expected it to with what little it had,
Yeah,
outside of Mister X, obviously.
yeah.
Hmm.
I mean, yeah, two had a lot of evolving forms of Birkin.
Yeah.
Um, and like Nemesis is evolving throughout this entire game. I kind of think he loses. I kind of think he evolves a little too quickly. Um, that that
Yes.
that more humanoid form kind of goes away about halfway through, and he becomes like a big quadrupedal monster.
Especially when you
Um,
consider that he only has the rocket launcher for like a few minutes in this,
well, he
but that
like
was like
trades
his
off
signature.
he
Yeah, that was
trades
his
off
signature
weapons a
weapon.
lot more. Yeah, like there's initially he's got nothing, and then he starts putting those things on other regular zombies to make them really fucking annoying to deal with. Like the parasitic like type things on their
Mm,
heads.
I just call them
yeah.
Um,
plug us heads, infected heads.
yeah,
Yeah,
almost kind of like those. And yeah, he gets the flamethrower for that one boss fight on that one rooftop, and then he gets a flame or a rocket launcher where you just run away from him, and that's when Carlos blows up a gas station to stop him, and that's kind of it for humanoid Nemesis.
yeah.
It doesn't go much more past that. There's a cutscene on the train, and then after you leave the train station, he falls into the river and becomes a bigger monster. It's over. Nemesis as we know him is over pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And then in terms of enemy variety, like we've got the hunter betas, and they're kind of creepy, but like nothing like terribly special. Those pale head things later in the game that you can't fucking kill are just annoying.
Yeah, the proto regenerators, and that ties into like
Yeah.
I mentioned earlier briefly the ammo economy in this game. At least in my experience, it was very weird. Whereas I was stockpiling ammo in the early game when I didn't really need it, and then towards the end of the game, where you're presented with a lot of bullet sponge enemies, like those. I'm just going to call them regenerators because they're basically kind of like the regenerators from RE4. Um, where you need lots of ammo, I found myself running out of ammo all the time in the end game.
Well, I felt like the
Whereas the
ideal was not to engage or shoot at those
yeah, no,
guys, it was just to avoid them.
yeah. Obviously, at the end, you could beat it just by avoiding them. But I'm not just talking about those. I'm just talking about in general. I didn't. I found
Mhm.
myself not being able to find ammo in like the back half of the game. It was almost like the game wanted you to stockpile ammo early and manage it throughout the entire game. It was kind of weird.
I mean,
Maybe that's just my experience or how I played.
yeah, it might have been because I never had any issues with ammo. I always had enough. Um, I think even in my initial playthrough, I mean, that's kind of like a problem with a lot of times playing on uh, survival horror games on standard difficulty. I found like that it was an issue I had back in 2013 when I played The Last of Us for the first time. I played through it on standard, and by the end, I just never hurt for ammo. I was constantly loaded, and it did not feel like a survival game. And then I played on ground or not grounded at the time. It was
Survival.
survival. Yeah, thank you.
And
You
Or
play on
Survivor.
survival difficulty, and I'm like, yeah, it's one of the two. Um, and I would always tell people like if you can handle a harder difficulty, that's the best way to play that game because it actually feels like you're surviving. And
Agreed.
Resident Evil's felt like that for a long time where you constantly have more than enough ammo to get through whatever is ahead of you if you're playing on the normal difficulty. You
Yeah.
start playing on the harder difficulty, things become a lot of times they just increase the enemy health and reduce your resources, and it just becomes a little lazy and unfair. But um, no,
is it
I this is a
is it
long-winded way to say I didn't feel like I felt like I didn't have the same issues that you did.
I mean, it only happened like once or twice towards the end. I just noticed there weren't as many pickups items towards the end, but
Mm,
it might have also been because, and maybe this was just me. Maybe it's just been a while since I played RE2 remake. The zombies here felt faster and more durable. Like I couldn't like kneecap them, disabled. Like they felt like they were
mm.
closing in faster. And maybe it was just the cramped level design, like
No,
some and the amount of mobs they throw at you and some of the encounters, like especially the Carlos ones.
I feel like when I replayed both of these games in October, because I replayed everything on when they in October for horror month, and just because the new gen versions had come out, so I played through 2 and 3 pretty much back to back, and they felt the same to me for the most
Okay,
part.
maybe I'm just misremembering them.
Um, if anything, Leon and Claire's arsenal is a little underpowered compared to Jill's arsenal against the enemies,
Well, that's the other
like
thing.
the standard zombies.
You get the shotgun like right off the bat. You're
Yeah,
stockpiling shells very early on. Yeah.
yeah. Um, but yeah,
I do remember the Carlos section when you're in the hospital and you're like having to like fight them from coming in the windows. I remember that part, like struggling with ammo for my first playthrough.
Oh, I beat it
I,
on the first try, but I did run out of ammo, and I had to take care of the last encounter. Just I had to knife the electric thing to stun them all, and then
Yeah.
knife them all to death.
Yeah.
man, man, I did not run out of ammo on that section.
I was also,
Yeah, we didn't really.
to be fair, I was also playing this game very liberally. Like I wasn't really
Yeah.
playing it like survival horror. I wasn't planning out like
Well,
I
I mean,
normally would.
but like that's the thing, right? And we've alluded to this before. Like Resident Evil, even the originals, like starting with 2, like they did want to lean more into the action. Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 1, original release Resident Evil 1 is much more a survival horror game. Resident Evil 2 is an action game with survival horror elements. And Resident Evil 3 even more so. And then obviously the whole formula got flipped on its head with Resident Evil 4, because it was an action survival horror game that actually updated its mechanics to lend better to the action than it did on the
Hmm.
PS1 games. So Resident Evil has kind of been
I agree.
prioritizing action over survival horror for a long time.
I agree with you. It has a very similar development history in terms of the creator's intent to like Final Fantasy, where a lot of the mainstay conventions we know of the series were due to technological limits of the time.
Hmm.
And then people reacted negatively when technology caught up and allowed the developers to do what they had always really wanted to do.
Well, I don't know that people reacted terribly negatively to
Well,
Resident Evil 4, but
I'm just saying, like diehards, Resident Evil Four.
no, yeah.
There. Believe it or not, there are
There is a
people who,
contingent of people that hate
yes,
that game. I know.
yeah,
They're wrong, but there is a contingent of people that hate that.
yes.
Sorry if any listeners don't like Resident Evil 4. You are wrong, but I hope you keep listening. um, but yeah, well, we've jumped around a lot on this game. Is there anything else we wanted to talk about?
So I guess just to be fair, to put in some things that I did like about this remake. I actually liked the change scene with Brad's death. I liked how that was handled
Oh
here.
yeah, we haven't talked about Brad.
Well, Brad is he's just like
In and out.
he's not even a side character. He's just there. But I did like the way they handled it here a bit better than it was in the original. I liked
Okay.
Mikhail's scene here, how he goes out. It's cool. How he sacrifices himself to try to take out, and he's just like, "Get off my train."
Yeah,
It's very
yeah,
cheesy Resident Evil.
yeah.
So there were things that I did like and appreciate. Um, I just like, and I feel, as I said earlier, I like on paper what the game is like. At least I think the writers were trying to do and what they were trying to set up. I think the
Hmm.
game just needed more time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that I don't disagree with. That I don't disagree with at all. I totally get it. Um, yeah, Brad. What I liked about Brad was that I mean in the original that Brad's fate is kind of tied in with Nemesis's introduction. He
Yes,
Brad dies when Nemesis shows up.
yeah,
He
he's the
Hmm.
one who
kills
tells
Brad.
you that there's a. He's the one who tells you that something's hunting stars members. Yeah,
Yeah, and then a little bit after that, you arrive at RPD. Brad shows up, and then Nemesis shows up, puts a tentacle through his chest, and Jill's like, ah!
yeah,
um, in very PS1 graphics, uh, but yeah, so that it's more he's more tied into that introduction, and it's very it's meant for it's kind of played for shock value. Here he's the one that gives you the warning until it's interrupted by Nemesis, and then you run into him in the street and he gets eaten by zombies in the same bar where he gets bit in the first or the original game.
Mm.
But the aspect that I do really like about it is that when Carlos and Tyrell make it to the raccoon to the police department building, Brad is there and you have to gun him down
right.
and get his ID card. That aspect I think is really because like Carlos doesn't know
And it
who he
becomes
is. He has no attachment to him.
and it also becomes a gameplay item that you have to use. It's a key item that
Yeah,
you have to use, which I thought was a
yeah.
cool touch. Yeah,
And I also I do like this is something we haven't talked about, which is the fact that this game, both the original and the remake, bookend Resident Evil 2. It takes place both before and after 2, so because it takes place over the span of 3 or 4 days. So like but before Jill becomes infected, it's all pre Resident Evil 2, and then after she wakes up, it's after. So
right,
Hmm.
all the events of Resident Evil 2 happen between those two time periods, and I really like how this game makes makes efforts to like to kind of tie itself into two. Like the fact that Brad is the reason Marvin Branagh got bit and was infected in the police department building before Leon shows up.
right.
I think that is super cool. You find
Yeah.
out that Brad is the reason that guy becomes infected. Um, I just think that's a great way to tie things in a little better. Or just even the fact that well, in the original, Nemesis actually is in the police department building
And you're
attacking
playing
Jill because
as
Jill's the one
Jill.
who goes there. Yeah.
Yeah,
Nemesis doesn't actually go into the Raccoon City Police Department
and
building
and
in this
the
one.
hole in the bathroom wall. A lot of people, when remake RE2 remake came out, a lot of people speculated that because it was a very Nemesis shaped, or I guess Nemesis sized hole, that
Yeah.
in RE3 remake they would have Nemesis go through there, which obviously isn't what happens, but
Yeah. That would have
it,
been cool though.
it would have been cool. It wouldn't have made sense because Carlos, he plays Carlos and he's in the
Well,
stars,
it
but
would have made sense if Jill
if
was
Jill was
still the
there,
one to
yeah,
go there, like in the original. But yeah, which I think is a part of why everyone was assuming that, right?
right.
Because everyone thought, okay, if they do an RE3 remake, then Jill's going to go there and Nemesis is going to attack her. That's going to make sense. And yeah, they obviously things didn't go as planned, so to speak. But yeah, that's just something I wanted to call out, and I think they did some cool things with that idea. I do think that it became a little hard to track the timeline a bit, um, just with how when they pop up the dates and the times and whatnot. And I was trying to work it out in my head, like, okay, when did RE2 take place? Does it make sense that this timeline? And it does work out. It does make sense. It's just um they didn't really, I guess, try to make it too obvious how those kind of slot in together.
Mhm.
Yeah, I don't think.
That might be. I don't think RE2 makes a lot of effort to tell you the date and time of that game's events, but I could be wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they were trying to avoid confusing people who maybe didn't play the original and didn't realize that, or
Yeah.
they just and it's taking place over such a shorter period of time as a game than RE2 was, so it
Well,
kind of feels weird.
yeah, in the sense that your playtime on this game is going to be significantly shorter than your
Right,
playtime on
right.
RE2.
That's what I mean. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. The last thing that I definitely want to call out as like a something I'm missing that the original had, like, and this kind of ties in with replayability. Um, Resident Evil 3, both the original and the remake, only have one campaign, whereas 1, 2 both have two. Well, 2 technically has 4 because you could do Leon A, Claire B, and then Claire A, Leon B. Um, this only has one in both iterations, but something that original RE3 had that this one doesn't, that I think would have made this game as a whole package a little more palatable, are those moments where you get to make decisions.
right,
And like the first one that you get to do is when Nemesis shows up at the police station, kills Brad, you can decide, do you want to run or do you want to fight?
right.
And that, like, there's some minor decisions, but there's some major decisions that change things toward the end of the game pretty significantly, and that's just gone from here. That's part of why, another major reason besides just the levels that are cut, like, the replayability is once again just linear succession of events.
Yeah,
There's no variation in what you're doing, whereas like Resident Evil 3 arguably had more scenarios to play through because there's so many different choices to make that could make minor or major changes in your playthrough. There's reasons to replay that game. There really aren't reasons to replay this game.
right.
Yeah.
That, yeah, okay. I guess there's not really much more to say about that. It's just a point that I definitely wanted to bring up.
I mean,
Wasn't there a secret ending? I feel like I remember a
yes,
secret ending, and then I remember reading about a secret ending
yes.
because I didn't play this game again for the spoiler cast.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't do
Wait,
my
a
homework.
secret ending in
For the
which the
original,
I
or,
don't
I
think
can't
or
I can't
so.
remember if it was in the original or if it was
in
in this one.
in the original, there is a different ending, I believe. If you whether or not you kill
Actually, no,
Nikolai,
I
and
think in
there's
the
other
remake
stuff.
too, there's yeah, in the original there was different outcomes, and in
Yeah.
the remake there was a
Oh,
secret ending.
well, it's less a secret ending and more there's an alternative ending. That there is an ending in the original where Barry will help you.
Yes.
But it's more so like, it's like not really a secret ending. It's more just an alternative ending because it depends on one of those choices that you'd make. So it's like it's an acceptable
It's like
outcome.
yeah, it's like saving the dog in RE4 kind of.
Yeah, sure, but this is even more obvious than that because
Right.
either making choice A or choice B,
Yeah,
and
Yeah.
it's not
the
like you have
game
to go far out of
pauses.
your way.
Yeah, like the game kind of pauses, and if I remember correctly in the original, and like
Yeah.
at least for killing Nikolai, it like pauses and say, kill him or let him live.
Yeah, and there's it does, yeah, it's like it's like a choice, like the screen will kind of go to a negative film effect, and then it'll give you the choice of like, do you want to do this or this? And that's kind of how that, it's like, yeah, like I said, it's more so one choice that you can get or one ending that you can get depending on the choice that you make, and the choice is very clear cut and obvious, like it'll lead to this or that.
Yeah.
I will say that there was a post credit scene in this game, not a substantial one. It's just Jill got out. She's seems to be have a nice apartment on a sunny day and picks up that vial that Nikolai shot, which I don't know if that what that's supposed to be implying, that maybe she's still heavily investigating who he's working
Yeah.
for.
Again, I think that this goes back to what we were talking about at the very beginning of the conversation, and how they're going to
It
tie it all in.
remains it remains to be
Yeah,
seen, kind of. Yeah.
because without spoiling anything, we know that this obviously isn't the end of her story in the series,
I
and some
mean,
big things happen. Yeah,
is it ever? They're constantly adding on to this canon. Like, they're not gonna stop.
yeah, it's like the
Um,
Marvel universe at this point. It's like which continuity, which Earth is it, and all that stuff.
yeah. Okay. Is there anything else we want to talk about? Story, gameplay, anything that we missed?
Actually, I was just looking at the secret ending real quick because I forgot. And it's not really confirmed that that's Jill that picks up that vial, is it? Because,
I
like,
mean, we don't see her face, but I think she's wearing similar
she
clothes.
no, she's wearing the person is wearing like a green shirt, which she wears a blue. I mean, the ass is kind of the same though, I
Well, I mean,
guess.
that's how I'm
The
identifying her, is by
the
the ass.
ass
I
Lila.
the
don't
ass
know. The
is
ass might be a little flatter. I don't know. Huh.
clip that. The ass is kind of the same.
Let's see. Hold on, wait. I'm gonna pause on the booty. I mean, it could be.
Delilah's doing some ass analysis.
Oh my god.
Hey, yeah, after your namesake, you got your name listed as
There you
ass in our
go.
Zencaster call. So,
There you go. But yeah, I don't know. A green shirt makes me think like Rebecca,
I
but
mean,
who
maybe
knows?
I'm gonna just go off the assumption that it's Jill. You're
Yeah.
right though. We don't absolutely 100% know, and Delilah's on the case looking at that booty, trying to
The
figure
booty's a
out.
little flatter than Jill's, just a little bit.
Well,
Just a little bit.
could it be a Claire thing leading into Veronica?
Like,
I don't know.
I don't know.
it's a green shirt and a little bit of a smaller booty than Jill's. That's all I can say.
Hey, maybe it's not Jill. You know, for all we know, it could be Rebecca or Claire. Who's to say? It's again, it's all just kind of it's all just kind of I guess up for debate.
Yeah.
And until we know more, that's that. Hell, maybe, who knows? Maybe it's Ada. What if it's Ada,
True.
guys?
That
True.
could be, yeah.
I mean, if Nikolai was working for Wesker, we know Ada was working for a mysterious or not even necessarily Wesker. Like, we don't know who Nikolai was working for, but I don't think we know who Ada was working for in Resident Evil 2 either.
Well,
In Resident Evil
remind
2
me.
remake.
But as far as we know, right now in this current timeline,
Yeah.
isn't Ada for all we know dead in this timeline at this point?
Well,
As far as we know,
no.
obviously she's not. But
I think,
I
do
don't
we
think
see something where
Doesn't
she
Leon believe she's dead from
Well,
remake?
Leon believes she's dead,
That's what I'm
yeah.
yeah.
saying. That's what I'm saying. So as the audience, we know, because it's like dramatic irony. We know Ada shows up again, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, I'm really sorry if anyone hasn't played any of these other games and listened to this episode, because yeah,
We talk a lot
we
about
spoiled
them.
a lot of other Resident Evil games than just three.
look, man, but like I just said, it's like comic books, dude. Like, I'm gonna spoil it
Yeah,
for you. Superman dies a bunch. Batman dies a bunch.
it is in a game so interconnected with like weird pharmaceutical company lore and whatever else this game series is about. Like, it's hard to talk about this game without talking about others in the series,
Yeah.
especially when they're trying very hard to tie everything in together. I get it.
Yes.
Um, Oh, I put in the notes to talk about Mega Man. How'd you guys like seeing original NES cover art portrayal of Mega Man in the toy store?
That was cool. Wasn't there
Mhm.
also like what's it called? The blaster cannon. Wasn't there like a mod? Not a mod. Maybe it was like an unlockable that you can get of his arm, the blast. I think it's called blaster cannon, right?
I think that is just a mod on PC or something. I don't believe it's an unlockable or anything.
Huh, why did I think it was an unlockable then?
That would be cool though. Maybe is it another? No, I think it's just a mod. I could be wrong though.
Which, speaking of the mods in this game are crazy. I mean, the amount of recommendations I got were a bit much.
Well, yeah, I mean that all started with Resident Evil 2. They were doing some weird shit to Mr. X in the modding community.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
um but yeah, and we didn't talk about Dr. Bard, but like he doesn't matter. Like he's a really sleazy doctor, and obviously he like ties in a little bit with that note we alluded to earlier about the parasites and stuff.
But it also,
Um
I think he's good. He's a fine, like you said, sleazy scientist that we've
yeah.
seen a lot of in Resident Evil. I think the notes though are good. Just we talked about grounding Umbrella and all these organizations, and you
Yeah.
see that he's schmoozing with like a U.S. senator, so it just like paints a bigger picture of all that corruption and greed.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah, he matters in that sense, the documentation sense, not so much the
Yeah,
character sense. Um,
there's a
It
sleazy scientist in literally every single Resident Evil game.
I just fact checked myself. The Mega Buster was actually in Devil May Cry, so still Capcom, but
oh,
yeah,
that
yeah.
makes sense.
I
That
knew it
makes
was from
sense.
somewhere, but I couldn't remember.
I mean, I feel like it's a very Capcom thing to do, right?
Yeah.
I'm surprised the Mega Buster
Actually,
hasn't been like an unlockable in a Resident Evil game. But
actually,
Yeah.
I take that back. Luis Serra is not a sleazy scientist. He's a cool scientist.
no, he's a sleazy. He
Or
might
He
be
is
he's kind of
likable,
very
but
he is
he's
sleazy.
likable. Okay,
sleazy.
okay, he is
The
sleazy. Yes.
The first thing he does when he sees Ashley is talk about her ballistics, Jason. He's
Yeah.
a
We'll get
I
hold
sleazy.
on.
see your dad has you well
We'll,
equipped.
let's not get ahead of ourselves. We'll get there.
Yeah, we'll get there. Trying to say Luis isn't sleazy. All right, is there anything else we have to talk about before the final question?
No.
All
Nope.
right, we ready for the final question then?
Let's
All
do
right.
it.
This was kind of a this was a big theory before Resident Evil 3 was announced, but after Resident Evil 2 came out. And the question, Resident Evil 2 came out, was the Resident Evil 2 was the first remake or first Resident Evil game to come out after Resident Evil 7, which we talked about a lot in our Resident Evil 7 episode. Got a lot of DLC, something
Hmm.
I complained about a lot because it just felt like that was how they decided to handle post game content, was not actually include any of it but make you pay for it.
And also
So
like have some pretty significant lore stuff tied to it too.
yeah, yeah. And whereas the next game we get, Resident Evil 2, comes out and it's bustling with post game stuff to do. Like
Hmm.
they've retained the fifth survivor, the last what the hunk thing, the hunk level
I
that you
know what
get
you're
to
talking
play.
about. Yeah.
Yeah, and the tofu survivor. They've retained all the stuff that was in the original release in that game. So there wasn't no one was really hurting for DLC, but since 7 got a lot of it, people were wondering, well, is 2 going to get DLC? And more so, since both games take place in Raccoon City, would they make Resident Evil 3 a DLC of Resident Evil 2? Obviously, that didn't happen. We got Resident Evil 3 as a video game. But as we just discussed for the past hour and a half, do we think Resident Evil 3 should have been released as a DLC for 2 instead?
I mean, if it's gonna be this long and this cut up, yeah, but had they actually kept the old sections in or even added more, not even to like bloat it, just to make like give us more time with Nemesis, give us more time with Jill, give us more time with Carlos, like flesh out those characters more, flesh out that villain more. Then no. I feel like there is a place for RE3 to be standalone, but because of how much they cut, sure. It would
you're
have felt better as a DLC.
you're
Yeah,
basically saying if we had gotten the game that we expected Resident Evil 3 remake to be, then absolutely not.
yes,
But given what we got, yeah.
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 I'm 100% with Delilah on this one. Like,
Yeah.
if it was actually going to be the full remake of the full game with the fully fleshed out story, yes, I feel like this game would have been much better received had it been a DLC, because at least expectations, would have been somewhat tempered. Maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I I don't I'm always caught between a rock and a hard place with a question like this because like I don't want to diminish the fact that this like overall I do think this game is uh, the lowest end of good. Like it's a good game. It technically plays well. It's fun to play. And it lasted 5 hours on my first playthrough. Right, I think I beat it in two
Yeah.
sessions,
That,
which
that's
like
one thing. That's one thing I can't take away is that RE engine. It feels good. Like, it kept me
yeah, like
going for pretty much one whole. I did it in one whole playthrough
in
almost. Yeah.
yeah in the end I enjoyed playing through that game. It's just I wish there was more of it because there really wasn't as much as I would have expected. Like the problem with this game is like you hold it up and compare it to any other Resident Evil, and any other Resident Evil destroys it in almost every category. And
Hmm.
that's and that it's especially bad when you hold it up to its original iteration that it's based off of and is actively trying to remake.
Right.
The original Resident Evil 3 probably will stand above this in the long run because it is the more fully fleshed out product. It has a mercenaries mode. This didn't have mercenaries. It traded mercenaries for for resistance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Original mercenaries was not in Resident Evil 4, it was in Resident Evil 3.
Yes.
Mhm.
But it's that was totally removed. And this is coming after Resident Evil 2 again retained all of its post-game content from the original game. It kept the or the fourth survivor, the again, the hunk thing, and tofu survivor. It kept all that stuff. And this couldn't even be bothered to implement mercenaries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um
That's kind of something I didn't really get to mention, but I'm glad you brought it up now. Is that when this game is not trying to really divulge like a story and a cutscene, when you're not in a scripted sequence, when it's just an open area, and you're playing Resident Evil, and it feels like Resident Evil, like you're having fun.
yeah.
And then
Yeah.
it's too short and gets interrupted by bad scripted sequences.
Yeah. So it's like I don't want to diminish the game too much for what it is and say like this should have just been a DLC. Uh but and especially because if you consider if this was released as DLC, the scope absolutely would have been reduced even further.
Yeah, for
Hmm.
sure.
But yeah, I do I like the one thing I will absolutely definitely agree with and say 100% is that this game was a disappointment and it had so much potential, could have been so much more, and it's just never until they go to remake the game again in 20 25 years, like this is its
Oh my god!
legacy. Yeah. Maybe
Remake,
let's not think about that right now.
yeah, RE3 remake V2.
So yeah, that's that. Anything else
Yeah.
you guys want to bring up?
No.
No,
Jason, you know what it's time for.
Kwasnicki rating,
Kwasnicki rating.
and I feel bad giving it this much, but like I said, coming back to the end, as we just said, when it plays like Resident Evil, you're having some fun.
Yeah.
So 4.5 herbs out of 10. It
Wow.
is just
Okay.
Wow.
below average.
Okay. Okay. All right. I let's wrap this bad boy up. Delilah, what you working on? Anything you want to plug?
Just weekly YouTube videos, mostly reacting to the Last of Us show. Last episode came out, so that'll be out this week.
Yeah.
And
I
posted playing the demo of RE4 remake, which was fun. And I stream every Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern at twitch.tv/assassina_san.
Nice. I do still say if we want to break the mold and talk about something that's not a video game but is still very much on brand for us, the HBO Last of Us show would be a good contender to talk about.
Yeah.
It would just make for a really interesting conversation because I do have a lot of opinions and thoughts on it.
As do I, and I haven't
Sure.
even watched it.
Yeah,
But
well,
I
yeah,
might actually be willing to watch it to discuss because I do think there's some interesting discussions to be had about it.
yeah,
I think we should for sure. Like, I mean, we have a lot of games coming in the pipeline, especially games that are very on brand for Reap the Spoils.
yeah,
So it might be a bit, but I think if we have like a month where we're like, we don't need to talk
yeah,
about a game this month.
yeah. Hey, if you absolutely want to hear our thoughts on that, leave us a comment telling us to get on that episode. Get to it, guys, and we'll try to prioritize it or something. Jason, you working on anything? You got anything going on in that brain of
I
yours?
have been playing OG RE4, which ages like wine. Coming off of
Does.
this, going back, I was like, how are games like this that are almost 20 years old better than everything coming out today? Which leads
I
us
know.
to.
Well, I gotta say, if I'm plugging
Oh
anything,
shit!
man,
Sorry, I forgot. Yeah,
I got nothing to plug.
sorry.
I'm just, I finally did start working on something, and I don't know when that'll be out, so I will provide updates on that as it goes. Um, but yeah, yeah, Delilah, audience, pretend you didn't hear what I said earlier. Delilah, what's our next game? What are we talking about next?
Resident Evil 4 remake. I'm so excited. This is my
Yeah,
most anticipated game this
It
year.
is, and
really?
the funny thing is
Yeah.
that I've even mentioned it in some of our previous episodes, which you should go watch. Um, I've like hinted at my reservations about this remake,
Yeah,
and that demo actually surprised me. It shocked
yeah.
me,
Yeah.
and it
There's a
made
lot of
me excited.
Yay.
Yeah, I've been getting there slowly as things have been coming out.
You had reservations too, Mark. You had pretty
I
much
know
the
I
same
did.
ones.
I
Yeah,
definitely did.
yeah.
I definitely we've talked about this extensively, and like to an extent, I still do. But the way I think to approach these remakes, this is kind of how I'll end this episode because it applies here. It applies to Resident Evil 2 remake. It applies to Resident Evil 4 remake. The way to approach these is they really are making these different products. They're not doing what they did with Resident Evil 1 remake, where there's after that Resident Evil 1 remake came out on GameCube and subsequently got re-released everywhere. Like there's almost no reason, unless you really want to be a Resident Evil purist and experience everything the series has given, like there's really no reason to go back and play original RE1 or even RE1 director's cut, because the remake did the same thing, but again added to it and just made it an infinitely better experience. But it's
Yeah.
still at its core the same experience. It's not the same with Resident Evil 2 and 3 remakes. They are completely different games. They borrow things, they take things, they take that core like backbone, but they change it into a completely different beast.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I've made my peace with whether or not, because Jason, you and I don't know about how Resident Evil 4 landed for you, Delilah, but like that's a top 10 game for both Jason and I.
It's a
Oh
top
yeah,
three
it's one
game.
of the best games ever made.
Yeah,
Top three game. It
it's
vies
a
for first
I
okay,
played that game
best game
last
like
ever.
year and it held up very well.
yeah,
Yeah, like I
like
said, I'm playing that game. I'm replaying it right now, and it feels better to play than any new game that I've been playing recently.
yeah, I agree. Still, yeah, okay. If we want to really yeah, okay, it's probably a top 3 game for me too, Jason.
For
But
both of us,
like,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, but like the point being though is that this isn't going to be the same, and that's okay, because Resident Evil 4 is one of the most readily accessible video games to date. You will be able to buy that video game on the PlayStation 7 because
I'm pretty sure
Capcom
it's
knows it prints money.
yeah. I'm pretty sure it's available on more consoles and obviously PC as well than Skyrim.
Yeah, people make fun of Skyrim for how often that game gets re-released. No, Resident Evil 4 gets re-released on way more things. And like it's okay because it's one of the greatest video games ever made, and I will gladly buy it every single time it comes out because I will play it every single time it comes out. I will enjoy it every single time it comes out because it's practically a timeless experience.
Yeah.
And this remake, just like the remakes for 2 and 3, it's not going to be the same, and it's going to be a very different game, and that's all right. That's all right because it's going the original Resident Evil 4 is always going to be there. And it's not going to be locked to the GameCube or the PlayStation 2 because it's come out practically every 5 years on
Well,
whatever new system is out.
I was gonna make a joke, but I'll save it for when we actually talk about
That's
RE4.
fine, yeah. Like it's just such an easily purchasable and obtainable game that I kind of let go of my fears because even if this remake fails me, which after the demo I have less reservations about, um the original is always going to be there. It's
Hmm.
always gonna be playable. It's always gonna be available to comfort me in any way. So,
Yeah. Agreed.
and on
Agreed.
that note, yeah, that this was Reap the Spoilers for Resident Evil the series, focused around Resident
Basically.
Evil 3. I
Well,
hope
it's
you
funny just
enjoyed.
because there wasn't that much to talk about with the
Yeah, I
three
know.
itself.
I we say that, but we did talk a lot about just that game specifically, and
Yeah.
this was a this was a good conversation.
I want to play as Jill again. Bring her back.
Yeah, no,
Make it happen.
Agreed.
Totally agreed.
Jill,
I am kind of looking forward to Death Island just to see more Jill.
and if it sounds like I
Yeah.
was over passionate or hyperbolic in our beginning conversation about Jill, it's because she is such a great character.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she really is. And I'm sick of her being in the shadows, man. I'm sick of Chris
Chris
Redfield fell
Redfield
always
making
getting the
stupid
damn spotlight.
decisions.
Yeah.
Punching
Like
boulders.
come on, bring my girl Jill back. Uh, if you liked this episode, if you're listening on YouTube, thank you. Please give it a like, share the episode, share the show, share the channel, follow the channel, subscribe to the channel, and subscribe on YouTube, guys. Come on, get it together, Mark. If you want to tell us what you thought about anything that we talked about in the comments, sound off in the comments, let us know in the comments, just talk to us, engage with us. If you listen to on Apple Podcasts, thank you so much. Please rate and review the show, 5 stars preferred. Tell us what you like, tell us what you didn't like, and share the show there, or any other podcast service you might listen on. Spotify, Google Podcasts, I think. Um, I don't even know what some of the other ones are. Pandora, I think we're on Pandora somehow that still
Nice.
exists. Yeah, just show us some love, show us some support. Really greatly appreciate it. And yeah, you can follow Delilah on Twitter at @Assassina_Sun. You can follow Jason or me on Twitter at Nibelheim. You can follow Jason on Twitter at Solid Quad, but
Stop.
don't follow him.
Stop putting my
Don't
Twitter
follow.
thing out. I
He
just want
doesn't.
that. I want them to erase it. I don't want it to be there anymore.
I mean, you could go and delete it yourself. You don't have
I
to
don't.
wait for someone to do it.
I don't. Yeah, I don't think I have the password on now.
And you could follow the show on Twitter at Dead Cell Media. And yeah, that's all I got. Join us next month for Resident Evil 4. Thanks for listening.
Goodbye.
Bye bye. It's a weird pause.